All right, good morning everybody. My name is Josh, and when I was in college, they paired me in campus housing with my roommate, and his name was also Josh. So we were the Josh dorm. I don't know why they did that, but they did. And my parents gave me their 1996 Plymouth Voyager. It was green, it's a minivan, and it was probably not the best idea since I went to school 4 hours away. It had some interesting features. One feature was if you slammed the passenger side door, the windshield wiper went off. I mean, the car didn't even have to be on, which was kind of concerning in retrospect. It just went off one time. Also, if it ever shifted into fifth gear and then you had to downshift, like if somebody cut you off in traffic or if you had to stop at a stoplight, it would never get back over 40 miles an hour unless you pulled over on the side of the highway, turned the van off and turned it back on. I don't know why my parents let me drive that, right? That is not a great vehicle, but it got me where I needed to go. And so Josh and I were in our dorm one day and we wanted to listen to music, but we didn't have a radio. We didn't have a stereo or a way to play CDs inside of the dorm room. And we were just sitting around one night and we said, I've got a great idea. Let's go to the van and rip out the stereo and put it in the dorm room, and now we have solved this problem. So we tried it. We were like, this is so crazy, it just might work. So we tried it, and it did work. And so I was like, wow, this is cool. And that's essentially what this talk is going to be about. At Dow Jones, we decoupled Gutenberg. We went into the Gutenberg editor, and we said, what if we could take it out of Gutenberg and put it in our React application and use it there? So why did we do that? Well, we needed to solve a problem. At Dow Jones, I work in the publishing section, and so we maintain more than three, but I'm going to talk about three of our main sites that we needed: the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, MarketWatch. They had a need where they needed to write posts quickly. And to understand that, I'm going to take a step back and tell you that we are a headless system. What does headless mean? Well, when you go to WSJ.com, you are not looking at a WordPress front end. We have a system over here. It's our front end system. It interacts with the posts we write in WordPress. So we do all of our writing and editing and saving to the WordPress database. We do that here at WordPress. And then our front end system takes that and displays it, right? I'm simplifying it, but you get the process. And then we have one other tool over here. It's a React application, and it's our planning tool. So we have a planning tool where we can plan things like, what assets do we want in this article when we write it? When do we want to write it? We want to have our posts scheduled out so that we have a steady stream of news that we can post. We want to propose headlines and talk to editors. And so that's our planning tool. Our authoring happens in WordPress, and then our front end picks it up. So let's take MarketWatch, for example. There might be a board meeting at Tesla, and some important information is being discussed in that board meeting. We need to get that information out as quickly as possible. We need to react to the market. Or like at Wall Street Journal, breaking news. You can't plan for breaking news, but when it happens, first to market matters so much. We need that push notification to be WSJ first. So we needed to make as lightweight and as quick of an editor as we could. We also, though, if we do something really fast, we want to be able to go back to that story as it develops and then put it into a full-fledged article. We want to add a gallery. We want to add images. We want to add social embeds and things where you can share with your friends and what SEO is going to do on a mobile device. We want to do that, but we don't want to have to wait to get that breaking news out first. Okay? So this all relies on the work that WordPress has done with the REST API. We said if we take Gutenberg and we put it in our planning tool, we can get it closer to the editors, we can make it really lightweight, and if something happens in a board meeting and you need to get that information out, you type just a couple blocks, hit send, it's going to hit the REST API, and then it's going to push that through our WordPress system. So we can still use the power of WordPress. We're going to leverage that at the speed of breaking news. That is what we wanted to solve. So what we're going to talk about is actually the easy part was moving the Gutenberg editor into React. The hard part was all of the work that we had put, the blood, sweat, and tears into getting our custom blocks to work in that system, because we have a very specific need. Right here, we have our custom plugin, and we don't want to duplicate our code, right? We all know that. We don't want to have to maintain the same code in two places, because we all know they're going to diverge. Or we don't want to have to rely on a feature existing in one and not in the other. So we want to have one code base. So I'm going to use, for our example today, our stock ticker. We have a block that we can put into an article. Like if I'm talking about Target, I can say, hey, this article, it has the Target stock ticker in it. And the front end system over here is going to say, okay, I'm going to put a live ticker in the article, because it's always changing, but we don't know what that is at the time of writing. So we have a plugin where we say, hey, here's placeholder, put a ticker in here for Target. We have a lot of business logic around that. But the problem is, it's very unique. So my daughter, Addie, she's 5. She really has gotten into Legos. And right now, we are about halfway through a Darth Vader helmet Lego build, okay? That tells you a little bit about my nerd culture. Yes, I'm more Star Wars than Star Trek. It's okay. But in order to make a Darth Vader helmet, you have to have very specialized Lego pieces that look a certain way and behave a certain way so that you can get that Darth Vader look. So we have specialized pieces, like this one on the left, where it's atypically shaped. It's got a hole in it that you can like stick a peg in so that it can go through other pieces so it can move a certain way. And that's what we had. We had a bunch of plugins that were designed specifically for the WordPress system. They were designed to do one thing and look a certain way right in the WP admin. And what we needed to do is make it more modular, like the Legos I grew up doing, where it's just the squares, and I built houses and swords and cars out of all of the same pieces, right? Different sizes, shapes, but it was very modular. And so we needed to take our custom builds and make them modular. All right, so I have a demo where I'm going to walk through, I'm going to show you the tool and how it uses the REST endpoint to interact with WordPress. Okay, so here, this is our planning tool, and I'm going to show you right here from the beginning. It's a React app. I hit Pulse, that's what we call it, and now we have opened up the editor. So this is, inside of React, this is the Gutenberg editor. It's already made an API fetch call, and it's created this in WordPress. So this is an old article for this test run. So I'm going to refresh the page. And here we go. This is the one we just created. There's nothing in it, but this is the read-only mode in WordPress where you can just view what's happening in the React application. I'm going to add a title. We're going to call it test article. I'm going to save. Again, it's just a REST API call. We've updated now the title of our WordPress post. Pretty cool. If I go back into here, I'm going to start by interacting with some of our custom blocks. So right here, we're going to add an author from our author database. We have all of the toolbar options. Like this is a paragraph block. I can bold, italicize, underline, use all of these keyboard shortcuts. Everything that's available to us in Gutenberg is available to us here. So I'm going to link this to wsj.com. And finally, I'll show you, we can even add our ticker. It's going to make a call to one of our custom endpoints. It's going to come back and say, is this the target you wanted to add? I'm going to say, yes, it's this one. Add it to the article and save it. The cool thing about this is that it makes the exact same Gutenberg markup that's in the WordPress database. So when I save it and I send it, WordPress doesn't need to do any translating. Everything is exactly the same. And now, I'm going to use the API to publish this And so it's going to go through our WordPress install and then make it all the way to the front end system. And our front end rendering is going to pick it up. So we're going to get a notification here saying, hey, this article's been sent, it's published, and now that it's published, it becomes a fully fledged article in WordPress. So I can open this up in WordPress, and when I do that here in just a second, you're going to see that it's no longer going to be in read-only mode. I can say edit in WordPress, and I have additional blocks now. I can add a deck, which is just like a sub-headline. I can add images. I have a lot more sidebar options. This is the full editor that we're used to seeing. Okay, how did we do this? Well, like I said, Gutenberg was easy, but we faced a lot of challenges. But I'm going to talk about 3 today, 3 main challenges, because each of these hurdles that we faced taught me something new about WordPress that I didn't know before. The first one I want to talk about is the global WP object. I'll take credit. I had a really brilliant idea that just didn't work at all. I said, what if we fully bundle all of the code for our ticker inserter? What if we fully bundled all of that code and then we just did a JavaScript import and now our block is over there? It's so easy. Wow, I'm smart. Has anybody in the last 5 years ever been on a Zoom call or like a Google Meet and somebody is just yapping away on mute, right? And you have to be like, Sal, you're on mute, please unmute. Like, oh, yeah. Has that happened to anybody in the last 5 years? It still happens to me every single day. I don't know why we haven't figured this out yet. That's what was happening in this context. We didn't realize that WordPress in the bundle process makes its own WordPress. It refers to the global object. So if you're at the top level of the window, there's a WP object that WordPress assumes is there. And when we moved into React, that wasn't there because WordPress does it for you. And so we had to rebuild that object. So it literally looked like, in our code, WP equals everything. So wp.data equals @WordPress/data. WP. You get it, right? We had to rebuild it. And then I was like, okay, now the bundling will definitely work. Well, it didn't. Long story short, nothing can communicate because it builds its own instance. I was like, this is great. It's going to just put it all together. And we figured out, oh, there was this bug. It's called the WordPress dependency extraction plugin. And when you bundle all of your code, it rips out WordPress and says, no, don't use these imported packages. Use the WP Global instead. Easy fix. Undo that Webpack configuration. Well, when I did that, nothing communicated because we had different instances of the stores being loaded. Our ticker inserter would talk to its store, but the rest of the Gutenberg editor would talk to its store. And so I had basically fractured the editor into as many blocks as we had loaded. So that didn't work. And also I found out that it crashes. So WordPress element is a wrapper around React. And when I put React inside of React, it really didn't like that. It shook its finger at me and said, you can't run React inside of React, and there are different versions. What are you even trying to do? So that brought me back to this, the global WP object. We had to manually construct it, and then we had to work with the dependency extraction plugin. So all of that to say, deep dive on what did we learn. There was a big debate amongst our team about what is better, to destructure from the WP object when you write your code, or to import. And we thought, well, importing, obviously, we're pulling the package in instead of using what's already there. And what we realized through the course of this is that It doesn't matter. WordPress treats it the exact same way, and it pulls all of that out and says, no, use the global WP object instead. So we finally got over all of that. Okay, second key challenge, localized settings. So at this point, I'm thinking, this is the clearly impossible puzzle. I was trying to figure out, all right, we solved these first couple problems, but now more problems have arisen. I love to do puzzles. And what's the first thing you do when you work on a puzzle? Corners and edges, great answer. I started this puzzle, and I realized that the first thing that you do is flip the pieces over. But this puzzle was clear, and so you never knew which side was up. And so at this point in the project, I didn't know what side was up. I was completely lost. And what is the next thing you do? The corners and the edges. But this puzzle had corners and edges inside the puzzle. To add to more confusion, I think when I finally sorted all the pieces, I had about 20 extra edges that didn't go in the edge and about 14 corner pieces. And I'm like, how does a puzzle have 14? I was checking my math, I was checking the piece. But yeah, they go in the middle. And so that meant that I had to be very, very organized and methodical about putting this puzzle together. So that's what I had to do with our globalized settings. So what are globalized settings? They're settings that you localize, usually in PHP, that exist at the global level so that you have access to them in JavaScript. These might be things like API keys or API endpoints that exist in the database that you want your PHP code to surface that your JavaScript code can then access. Okay? Now, we don't have PHP in the React application. So when we moved our code over, what was happening is that we would get JavaScript errors. It would say, no, you said that this exists, but this variable does not exist. So it falls over. So how did we solve that? Well, we wrapped it in a get settings function. And that way, both applications can be aware of this function and then respond differently based on the context it's in. So the best way I can describe it is if I ask somebody, if I say, okay, person one, what's your favorite color? They could say red. I'm like, okay, great. If I say person two, what's your favorite color? They could say blue. Now, think of get settings like the question favorite color. You both have context into what that means. Favorite color, I'm going to return my favorite color. But based on where I called it, I got a different response back. And that's what we ended up doing. So in this case, here's one line of code that says, hey, give me an API endpoint. And in PHP, it said, okay, I will give you the one WordPress needs to use. And then in our React application, it said, oh, actually, we keep that somewhere else. I'll give you this API endpoint instead. So this way, we can also make it a little bit more extendable because now we can have context-aware code that's going to behave differently if we need it to in our different environments. Okay, finally, the WordPress editor. So for the last 10 years, I have taught teenagers on a weekly basis. And at one point, it was early on, I was so boring that I looked out in the audience and one kid had eaten half of a cup. I'm not kidding, a styrofoam cup, a little bit at a time. I don't remember what the lesson was on, he doesn't either. But I don't see anybody eating a cup, so I feel good about myself at this point. But let's talk about the WordPress editor. If you're like me, when I started early in WordPress, especially Gutenberg, I didn't realize that there's a difference between the editor and the block editor. So here is the block editor. This is what we moved into WordPress. I mean, into our React app. Right? It looks similar. We didn't move the panels. We don't have a use case for them yet. We just moved that number 2, that middle section, and we moved it over here. Okay. The difference that really matters is that some things only exist at the editor level. The editor is the rest of the page. It includes things like the Save button, but it has access to all of the post data. It has access to the metadata that's in the database. And so when we moved things into our application, we lost the ability to read and write metadata using data stores, and some of our code broke in weird ways. What I didn't realize is that sometimes you can interchange block editor and editor because the data stores have similar functionality. So one solution is try to use block editor wherever you can. Next, don't use post meta unless you absolutely have to. Save things as block attributes when available. And yes, we can solve that problem in React if we wanted to get post meta every single time. We can make a call using the API to the database, but that's a lot of noise, and that's just going to slow down this tool that's supposed to be built on speed, right? So we could do that, but don't do it. Unless you absolutely have to, then you could build an endpoint to do that. Or, my favorite, bail early. If you absolutely must have access to the editor and the post meta or anything that it does in WordPress, but you don't need it over here, have an early return. Just say, hey, if I can't find the editor, exit what I'm about to do. And then that will prevent your application from crashing. All right, finally, these are my honorable mentions because I spent so much time on these and frustration on these, but I don't have time to go into all of them. There's too much detail. But the first one is dash icons. Dash icons are those icons that we usually use in classes, class names, but they exist in WordPress because we have all the style sheets in WordPress. It was like, easy fix. We'll just put the style sheets in the React app. I never showed anybody else. I only did it on my local because it broke so bad. It broke all of the styles. Have you ever, in Microsoft Word, tried to like move something like an inch to the left and your whole document just, poof? Yeah, that's what I did. So I'm like, this is not a solution. Well, there is an NPM package. It's called @WordPress/icons. And you can use some of the same icons that you use in dash icons. Now, not all of them exist in the icons package that exist in dash icons. So we had to make some tweaks. But the good news is now we have icons that are consistent between our two editors and everything appears the exact same. Linting, so linting, WordPress has very specific standards, and our React app has very, very, very different standards. So when we started importing our blocks into there and trying to run a build, we were just getting walls of hundreds and hundreds of ESLint errors. And again, we don't want to change our code, so how can we in one code base have ESLint pass in one and skip in another? That was a problem we had to solve. Filtering. So if you're not familiar with filters, they allow you in a block to have differing functionality, and our brands have different functionality that they require for their various business needs. We usually handle the filters on the theme level. So we have the WordPress theme for MarketWatch and WSJ tap into the filter and change the functionality for their business need, but we don't have WordPress themes over here. So how do we do that differently? And then finally, this was the worst of these four, but I found out that there is no undo and redo functionality in the block editor. That actually exists higher up at the editor level, at the entities level. And so a simple undo redo didn't work. And we had to eventually write our own undo redo, keeping track of editor history in state. But then also we got to use some really cool WordPress packages to create keyboard shortcuts and register it to the block editor. So that was a fun one, but way too much to go into there. So that is essentially how we pulled out the car stereo and we put it in the dorm room, leveraging the power of WordPress at the speed of breaking news. Now, what are the practical applications of this? We're freeing the editor from the WP admin. I can think of if you have a bunch of clients who are spinning up microsites rapidly, you could build a Vue.js application, a Next.js, React app, and you can have the WordPress editor look different for each of these clients in a sleek design that they want, and still have a multi-site on the back end that gives you all of that power and lets you do things like post locking and revision history, and you're going to use the database and the API, and they would have no idea. All their sites could look completely different, and it goes through the WordPress editor, just empowering you to multiply that across however many sites you want. But then also, if you have a difficult client who says, I don't like the WP admin, I don't like the way it looks, I don't want to use it, it's too clunky, you can say, oh, don't worry. I will build you just the coolest little React application, and that's what they use, but you can still, again, leverage all of the power for free and get what WordPress has to offer. So finally, I wanted to put this up here. This is a link to the GitHub repository. I did not have time to put everything in here. And there's also a lot of proprietary stuff that I can't put in here. So this is a starting place, and I would encourage, the best way to get in touch with me is to open an issue and ask, like, how did you do the undo redo history? Like, I would love to share as much code as I can with anybody who's interested in learning how we did this. And if I can help anybody from the pain that I experienced, I would love to do that. Okay, at this time, if there are any questions, I'm sure I've answered all of your questions perfectly. But if there are any questions, I wanted to save time for that. I have a really smart team behind me that worked on this with me. I have the privilege to come out here and present it. So I might not know all the answers, but I will do my best. So if there are any questions, I think please come to the microphone so the people on the recording can hear. But I'd be glad to answer anything.
Hi. First of all, thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I have many questions. I will only ask one. Are you using only custom, like build from you and your team blocks, or are you using the built-in blocks, like featured image or something like that? And if that is the case, how do you manage with the context? There's a block editor context component, which is kind of my bête noire. I'm going through the same pain that you've probably gone through, so thank you.
Right. Yeah, so we actually stripped out a lot of the core blocks because we didn't want to confuse the editors. But as the default, they all exist. All the blocks are in there once you register them. Now, some blocks, like you're not going to have access out of the box to the image like the image uploader. You'd have to like write some sort of connector there. But for our context, most of the blocks worked right out of the box. So we didn't need to solve any problems like that, and they all work, which is incredible. And in my example, it's a Vite application where I have the sidebar, and you can see, you can still interact with the sidebar and change things like font size and all of those cool things the block editor gives you. It's still there. Yes?
Hey there. I was noticing there's an iOS app for Wall Street Journal. Are y'all using like React Native or something and tying into this, or how does content get on the native apps for like Android and iOS?
Oh, yes. So that's the mobile team would be able to tell you that, but that's part of our complicated front-end system. So they're not all reading from the WordPress database. We just use that for editing. The database actually gets sent to a much more complicated database where everything's broken out into JSON, essentially, and then all of the different applications just read that unified JSON and display it in the way that they need it. So mobile, web, they're all different. Even, I think, the Apple News and everything, it renders differently based on whatever those teams need. Yeah.
Hey there. I am curious what led to your guys' decision to only decouple the editor rather than, you touched on it a little bit at the end, rather than just having WP admin be the headless backend and just kind of maybe radically redesigning it if a client was unhappy with certain like aspects of that. What led you to just decouple the editor from that?
Yeah, great question. So essentially, it is time and complexity. So with time, we had a short timeline to get this going, and the complexity of trying to get the full editor was not really working out. Some things that I've found in my journey here is that there is a lot of really good documentation for using WordPress. There's not a lot of good documentation for how to misuse WordPress in a way like an engineer would want to take it apart and use it in a way it's not supposed to be. So I spent a lot of time on GitHub issues and on Slack threads and also track tickets and reading about when these things were introduced and how they're introduced and how these decisions were made. And that essentially became the documentation. The issue with the editor is that it does things with PHP behind the scenes that the block editor doesn't need. And so I was never able to really instantiate a full editor because it just kept crashing and there was too much exploratory, what is going wrong and then how can we fake it, right? Faking the WP, the global WP, that was relatively simple, but faking everything that it does to get a full editor to load was a lot more complicated. And metadata was one of those. It kept trying to pull metadata and saying metadata doesn't exist. I'm like, I know it doesn't exist. We don't have a database to get it from. So that's essentially why.
How's it going? We're about to do something similar at my job with a contractor. Are you extra hesitant, I guess, to update the core of WordPress, knowing that you did all these customizations?
Like update our WordPress core?
Yeah. Does it crash easily?
No, I'm not hesitant to update the core of WordPress, but what that does come with is because we have a fake WP global, part of the dependency extraction plugin is that it doesn't matter what version of packages you're pulling in at your plugin level, it's going to pull it out and it's going to use whatever is on the version on WordPress. So I can use the latest version to build my block, but if I'm on 6.3, it's going to pull in 6.3's version of those blocks. What that means is that when we upgrade from like 6.3 to 6.6, I have to manually go in here and make sure that all of the versions in our fake WP global match the versions there. So that's really only the pain point we're going to feel, and we already feel that when we do a WordPress upgrade. We have functionality that's deprecated or changed, so any work we'd have to do there, we'll just have to do over here as well. Yeah.
Are the majority of the editorial team then using the React app, not the WordPress application, for editing articles on a day-to-day?
No. So this is a very specific use case for breaking news.
So it's both?
Yeah, and even when they do use the React app, it's just to get something started, and all of the editing happens in WordPress later. So we create that breaking news story so that we can then go into WordPress and build out the article. So that's really our main source of article creation across all of our sites.
So when you were looking at that, I guess, for this architecture, I've seen other teams do similar things, but then they end up saying WordPress is really just acting as a database and going down a more database-driven CMS. Was it the editor, the Gutenberg editor, that was sort of the thing that tipped the scales to sort of go down and bite the bullet and sort of rip the Band-Aid at having to sort of jam Gutenberg into a non-WordPress instance, or were there other reasons, I guess, that you went down that architecture of picking WordPress?
Well, we've been using WordPress for a long time, and we have put a lot of like custom business logic into WordPress, and so that's why we decided to move Gutenberg over, because we didn't want to lose all of that equity that we've built up in that system.
Hey, thanks. Could you maybe explain from more of a non-technical, more operations standpoint, like when breaking news happens, like who's using this React tool, what do they do, and then where does it go, and then who does the next thing and kind of how it propagates, like from the needing to be quick all the way through it showing up kind of on your different environments.
Right. So let's say that we won't use breaking news. We'll use tickers. Let's say that a lot of market data is happening at the same time. We need to write these stories quickly. So I can have one editor in this React tool. It's a single page application. So they say, hey, I need a new pulse really quick. I type out one paragraph, add a ticker, hit send. I can have a brand new pulse ready to go. So I'm going to pump out 5 in a row as quickly as I can. And then they all go, they're published now. They're live. The way that happens is they hit publish, and it goes to our WordPress system and says, save this information, and then do a WordPress publish. Because all of that custom business logic where we turn it into that data that they need downstream, that big JSON object, that happens in our PHP code. So we send from React, we say, hey, go over here, build that thing, have WordPress send it out, and then our front-end systems pick it up. So the workflow there is I need stuff quickly, and I need a lot of them. So I'm going to send them out, send. Now another editor can be in WordPress and say, okay, wait, more information came in, so now I'm going to pick up this article about Target, and I'm going to add some more context, and I'm going to put in some social images. And so then it just updates that original post with more context as the story unfolds. So it's the same article, it just keeps growing.
So it really is about seconds and minutes of speed.
Yes, it's about.
And then other people have more time to come in and fill it.
Yep, it's about first to market.
Just on that same theme, as a first-time WordCamp visitor, your ultimate when your customers see the websites, they're seeing a WordPress rendered website, right? It's not React. I mean, if I look at the site.
No, if you go to wsj.com,
Yes.
you are going to see our front end,
Right.
which is not WordPress at all. So we are using WordPress to write the posts,
Okay.
and then a completely different system
Okay.
picks up that information, we
Okay.
send it, and displays it using, I think, React or...
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But the question, so it's a different React.
Yes, yeah, a different tool.
See, the question is, tell me. I'm just trying to understand what drove you to the React solution for the editing, in other words, for the creation of it. I think you explained it. I think you're suggesting it's a performance issue. Is that? I mean, I'm just trying to understand why use React for in the scenario that you used it for, rather than just the WordPress editor.
Yeah, so that was the React tool was a pre-existing planning tool. And that's where the editors are doing a lot of their pre-work in, and it's a little bit quicker. And so it doesn't have all of the heavy lifting things that WordPress does. And so it gave us just a performance improvement.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and your attention. I appreciate it.